Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our 5th season, and we remain just as excited as ever to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like asthma and allergies, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung, heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we begin our series on plastic pollution. And today we're going to focus in on what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everyone know about it? Well, consider the daily plastic waste that you yourself discard into the trash or recycling bin. Things like the coffee cup lid and the coffee cup itself in some cases, perhaps a newspaper or bag, the wrapper from a granola bar, a yogurt container, a takeout container, and the excessive packaging from a delivered box or an Amazon delivery. And while these items offer us the convenience that we want, they also carry a substantial environmental cost. In 2021, global trash generation reached a staggering 400 million tons, with the U.S. alone contributing approximately 51 million of those tons, equating to approximately 300 pounds of waste, plastic waste, per person per year, of which only about 2.4 million tons were recycled. And so the toll on the planet begins even before these disposable products reach your hands, as plastics primarily are derived from fossil fuels and they undergo a very, very energy-intensive process while they're being made, thereby emitting greenhouse gases as well as hazardous chemicals. Now, plastic pollution defined refers to the accumulation of synthetic plastic products in our environment, causing harm to wildlife, to habitats, and human populations. Synthetic plastics, constituting about 95% of all plastics ever made, are derived from crude oil, natural gas, or coal. The invention of Bakelite, which was an earth-changing or a life-changing plastic. And that happened back in 1907. And that marked a revolutionary introduction of truly synthetic plastic resins into our world commerce system, making plastics more moldable and harder. However, by the end of the 20th century, plastics were being recognized as persistent polluters across various environmental settings. Now, compared to the materials that were prevalent in the first half of the 20th century, such as glass, paper, iron, and aluminum, plastics have a very low recovery rate. Their inefficiency in recycling attributed to processing challenges like low melting point, and that hinders their reuse as recycled scrap in the manufacturing process, very different from, again, those older mediums that we use like iron and glass and things of that nature. Now, since its commercial development in the 1950s, plastic has experienced exponential global production, becoming ubiquitous due to its favorable qualities everywhere. And those qualities include ease of shaping them, low cost, and mechanical resistance. However, this success comes at a significant cost to both our health and the environment. And while the impact of plastic pollution on sea life is well documented, scientists are increasingly studying plastic's effects on human health, fertility, land ecosystems, crops, and other plants. Now, the main ingredients in plastic, again, originate from oil and natural gas processing. And different molecules yield distinct plastic properties as well as distinct chemical structures. And manufacturers incorporate many additives like colorants, plasticizers, flame retardants, stabilizers, fillers, reinforcing fibers, and biocides, some of which contain hazardous substances like lead, arsenic, cadmium compounds, and BPA. Now, plastic packaging alone can contain over 4,000 chemicals, with many common ones posing risk to human health. Essential for transporting, storing, handling, and preserving food, food packaging materials involve various plastic polymers combined with other substances like printing ink to put the labels on all those plastic packaging, adhesives, and coatings, contributing to their overall human toxicity. So the health and the environmental hazards associated with plastic demand a comprehensive reconsideration of our reliance on these pervasive materials, and they demand a commitment to sustainable alternatives. Now, this is a lot, but here today to help us explore and unpack some of this are two experts who are going to make us smarter. With us today, we have Mary Johnson. Mary is with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She is a principal research scientist in the Environmental Health Department at T.H. Chan. Mary leads studies which investigate the impact of climate factors such as air pollution, wildfires, and other environmental exposures such as toxic metals and microplastics on immune health. Mary's goal is to use this research and the findings to both educate and shape policy to improve our health. Welcome, Mary, and did I get all of that right?
Yes, you got all that right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for making time to join us today. And our other guest is Nina Shah. Nina is the director of the Resource Conservation and Sustainability Division at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, fondly referred to as the EPA. Nina works to advance a circular economy and implement the bipartisan infrastructure law recycling efforts. Nina worked as a corporate environmental attorney at several law firms and has over 30 years of environmental law and policy experience. Welcome, Nina, and did I get all of that right?
You did. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here, Bernice.
And thank you again for making time to join us. So I want to start with you, Mary, and talk to our listeners about why is plastic and most things made of plastic? Why is that a problem in our world today?
Sure. So the problem with plastic, well, there's many problems, but the main thing is plastic doesn't break down. It will break up into pieces and smaller pieces, but it doesn't actually break down. And it also contains other things, lots of different toxins that can be harmful to health. And so the fact that, it will stay in our environment or in our body, wherever it is, and ultimately, not degrade is the biggest problem with plastic and plastic use.
So plastic almost never goes away. And I've heard that term, forever plastics. So all of those bottle caps and the ink caps and the plastic bags and the food containers, all of that stuff is still around somewhere, primarily in the oceans. But also, to some degree, they're proving more and more so in our bodies. So, Nina, how does plastic pollution impact human health and well-being?
Thank you for that question, Bernice. And Mary is going to have some additions, I'm sure, to my answer, given her research. I think, as has been stated in your introduction and by Mary, we ingest plastic, we breathe in microplastics, and we can consume leachate that comes from plastic materials in ways that we don't even think about on a day-to-day basis. And there are emissions that are created from plastic manufacturing that can be inhaled and impact human health. And there's a great deal of research that is, focusing on this around the world because we're finding plastic, microplastics, and nanoplastics in really remote areas, places that we didn't expect to find them. But, I think it is interesting and important to recognize that plastic is a very useful material for many reasons, right? It can help keep our healthcare setting safe, and it can also be used in the delivery of food and to help keep that fresh and edible for us. And so it's a super challenging issue because the plastics of property that make it so useful in some aspects of our life are also, as Mary suggested, some of the same challenges that make it so problematic from an end-of-life perspective. But one of the other things that we're looking at is really the social cost of waste. So when we think about plastic pollution in our communities, what impact does that have on how we think about our communities? If there is a lot of litter present, how that impacts if we think about our housing property values and things like that. And can it bring rodents? Can it bring smells and other things and odors that are problematic? So broadly speaking, I think there are lots of impacts. Despite its incredible properties that make it so useful, there are these challenges that we're thinking about from a human health and well-being perspective.
Indeed. Thank you for that. We're going to go to break, and then when we come back, we are going to go to Mary to talk a little bit more about those health impacts. We'll be right back on the other side with Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School and Nina Shaw with the EPA. Thank you all. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all H-E-B stores, all natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 40 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show in our series on plastic pollution. And today we're focusing in on what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everybody know about it? And to make us smarter, which they already are, we have with us today Mary Johnson from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Nina Shaw with the Environmental Protection Agency. And again, thank you all so much for being with us. Now, before the break, Nina was telling us about some of the impacts of plastic pollution. But before I go to Mary to really drill down on those health impacts, you mentioned leachate. And would you explain that? I know the term leachate in terms of the stuff that comes out of landfills. But in terms of plastic pollution, can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by leachate?
Sure. I think it's a great question, and perhaps I misused the term, but like I'm thinking about when you are drinking from a plastic water bottle, for example. Maybe it's been sitting around for a long time. It's hard to say. Maybe it's been in the sun, and often that some of those additives in that plastic material can break down and be in that water. And Mary can, of course, correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Indeed. I know that if it didn't take the world by storm, it sure took me by storm a few years ago when all the information was coming, do not drink water out of your plastic bottle, but that's been sitting there in your car for a long time. And I think that's that point. And I think a lot of people finally got that. Thank you for helping us understand that a little bit more. So, Mary, can you talk to us more, though, about the health impacts of plastic pollution and exactly how that happens?
I sure can, but I want to mention a study just came out that looked at different bottled waters, and they didn't give the brands, but they found that there was nearly 250,000 of nanoplastics within a bottle of water, which is much higher than anyone expected. And so it's just another reason to try, if possible, to avoid, single-use, plastic water bottles. So that's pretty shocking. So I'm sure there'll be more research in that area.
It really is. And it seems as though plastic water bottles are just proliferating year after year after year after year. It's interesting when we talk about 1 month on our show, usually in the summer, we deal with the theme of water, oceans, and water conservation. And so it's interesting. I know it's been brought up before. Which is safer, the water in that bottle or the water that's coming, from your municipal authority? So we'll debate that again this summer when we talk about water conservation. But if you would tell us some of the major health impacts of plastic pollution. I know there are a number out there, a lot of in research. And a couple of years ago, we had a researcher. She was at, I think, Harvard, Brigham and Women's University, named Shanna. And she had recently published a book that indicated that plastic pollution was causing sexual or gender dysfunction issues. But tell us about the health impacts, Mary.
Sure. So, we're becoming more aware that, the microplastics are throughout our environment, but we're also learning it's also throughout our body. So if we, for example, look at the blood, even of children, we will find microplastics. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to avoid it. We have also been able, as researchers, to see microplastics in the placenta. So one of the studies that we're going to be working on is looking at cord blood and what levels of microplastics do we see in cord blood? What is actually getting passed on from the mother to the baby? We can see microplastics in lung tissue, in the brain, microplastic in feces. And there was an interesting study that found that the level of microplastics in feces was higher in those who had irritable bowel disease. And there haven't been a lot of studies of that nature. I think that's a very active area of research, but that is telling. Most of the research that's been done so far is looking at the level of the cell or in animals, looking at the impact of the microplastics. And we know, for example, that exposure to the microplastics, in a dish with cells, that you're going to see inflammatory reactions and oxidative stress reactions. And that's not surprising, but I think the next step will be to look at, human subjects in larger groups and be able to try to correlate levels of microplastic exposure with health outcomes, or for us, immune outcomes. One of the difficulties is there's not 100% consensus on how to measure the microplastics. There's different ways to do that. But I think in the next few years, we'll see a lot more really informative research in this area.
What are the human impacts, the illnesses, or the diseases? Which of those out there has there been proven or indicated a direct influence on plastics or microplastics? Like what you just said that indications are, and I guess studies are underway to determine the relationship with irritable bowel syndrome. And so that's on the way. But are there any other issues out there where there is a fairly conclusive relationship?
There's studies that suggest an association between the two. But as far as cause and effect, when you get outside of the Petri dish, I think more work needs to be done. It is difficult. It's difficult to measure in the blood, and expensive. And so, there aren't a lot of really rigorous studies in a large group of, humans showing without a doubt, that there's this cause-effect relationship. Associations, but not the cause-effect.
The term, and I know that's kind of what y'all use as scientists, without a doubt. and I understand the need for that, but it's like some of the other very, very harmful things in our environment that have been proven without a doubt. Now, it's like by the time we get to without a doubt, then there's a really big, serious impact. But I think it is certainly significant what you've said and what we do know, and that is that the microplastics have been seen in the blood, and they've been seen to be able to, I guess, cross the placenta.
Correct.
And those things are true, those things are proven, and those things are significant.
Right.
And so going back to you, Nina, though, what are some of the other ways that are perhaps not talked about or not obvious? Some of those other ways that plastics get into our environment.
Well, I mean, when I was thinking about this question, what I really want to talk about is I don't think most people equate plastic with climate change and an increase in global greenhouse gas emissions, right? So the environment and economic impacts of plastic products and their byproducts are really felt across the life cycle, including their production, the use of plastic, and its disposal. In 2019, plastic products were responsible for 3.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions through the life cycles, with 90% of these emissions coming from the production and conversion of fossil fuels into new plastic products. And a lot of this information is in our draft national strategy to prevent plastic pollution, which came out in April of last year. And, you know, if the world continues with business as usual, greenhouse gas emissions associated with the life cycle of plastic products are expected to double by 2060, which is really incredible. And without intervention, it is projected that by 2050, the global plastics industry will account for 20% of total oil consumption and up to 15% of global carbon emissions. And we've been working on this. Of course, the climate impacts are huge, but the impacts to humans as we start to see the impacts of climate change are great as well. From the human health impacts of digesting the toxins that come from some of our production facilities, but then also the impacts of climate change, the increase in heat, the increase in more severe storms, and things like that, right? So it's extensive, and we're really starting to see, I feel like in the last year alone, the number of fires, the number of floods, and things like that, it just seems to me they have been more severe. So this is a significant issue, and I think that's one of the ones that often goes missed in this conversation.
Indeed. And we just have a minute to go. But on the other side, Nina, I'm going to want you to maybe take an example of a plastic bottle or something that all of us use that's plastic. Take an example of that and walk us through the life cycle. In other words, connect the dots for people, because it's very hard for many people to see and to imagine, and certainly then to internalize how plastic, this little plastic bag here, or this plastic cap on this bottle, and things of that nature can get to the big climate change. So we'll be right back on the other side of the break, and after that, we'll go back with you, Nina, so you can connect those dots for us. Thank you. We'll be right back with Nina Shaw with the EPA and Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Thank you all. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on plastics pollution, as we focus in on what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everyone know about it. I think it's because we love plastic so much. And we are back with our guest, Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Nina Shaw with the Environmental Protection Agency. And we want to go back to Nina to kind of walk us through and connect some dots, walk us through the life cycle of a plastic component that most of us use every day, so we can kind of understand how it's impacting or affecting the environment and our health as well. So walk us through the making of whatever you choose.
Sure. I mean, this is a great question, and I think what I'll use is a plastic bottle. Could be a plastic water bottle, or it could be for soda. That is typically made, but, you know, it can be made from any number of plastic resins. There are 7 different types of plastic resins. There is a resin ID code at the bottom of that bottle, and it'll have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 in it, in that notation. And sometimes there are chasing arrows in a triangle around that number, and that's called the resin ID code. But when that bottle is made, it is made from fossil fuels. The different companies, chemical companies, will create a resin that is then led into a feedstock that creates the bottle. So in that creation process of the resins, there are emissions from that process.
And I hate to interrupt you, but I want to ask this question. So let's say that ExxonMobil, an oil producer, oil company. So they get this oil from the ground and they send most of it, they send some of it for gasoline, but they're also producing some with these resins for our single-use plastics, right?
Yeah, I mean, for single-use plastic, but other plastics as well. It's not all going to be for single-use plastic.
Okay, so some goes to gas and then others goes to plastic right there at the producer level.
Yes. And so then that feedstock, right, will go to companies that are actually making the different products. And then those products are used. Now, single-use plastic, which is a term that we have brought up a couple of times, that's a complicated term. We don't have a definition yet at EPA, and it's because you can have single-use plastics that might be only used once, but can be used for 10, 20, 30 years. But you also have troubling, single-use plastics that really have a very short lifespan. You may use it for only 5 minutes.
Like plastic bags.
Like plastic bags. You can use it for your trip home and then it gets thrown away, or it becomes litter and then it breaks down into the environment. So is that the dot connecting that you wanted me to do?
Right. So while ExxonMobil is making this resin, and when it goes to the companies that make the plastic bottles and the plastic bags and what have you, there's a lot of energy use. I want to talk a little bit or give a little description of the energy use that happens then and the impact there of climate change, because it appears, though, that climate change can be impacted at a lot of places along the way.
Absolutely. You're going to have emissions and energy usage along the entire chain, especially from creation of the resin, use of that resin in the manufacturing process, and then in the delivery of that product, right? Because you also have emissions that come from the transportation of these materials to the different points of use around the world.
So here in Texas, in South Texas around Houston, as you go toward Louisiana, you can drive along Interstate 10 and you see these big towers with the flames emitting.
Yes.
Is there a connection to that with plastics? Because most of us just think, oh, that's the oil that they're bringing in that's going to turn to gas. But that instance of seeing the fire come from those tall things, which we all can figure out without much guessing that's polluting.
Some of those facilities down in Houston, I've been there, and I've been to some of those facilities. They're not only producing the oils for gas use, but they're also the same ones that are producing the resins for plastic production.
And I doubt that many people connect that dot. They think, oh, it's gas, but they never even think or dream that could have any relationship to the plastic cap on their water bottle or to that bag or anything else that they're doing. Thank you for helping us out with that. I appreciate it. Mary, I want to go back to you, though, and look at what are the current challenges and opportunities for reducing plastic waste and increasing, for lack of a better word, I hate to say this, but increasing the health or decreasing the health impacts of plastic in our world?
One area that everybody can focus on to a certain extent is the single-use plastic, whatever definition that is. I think I'm environmentally conscious, but I actually just used a plastic knife while right before this started. I'm feeling guilty, it happens. But I think just becoming aware of that will help people to try to limit their waste, their plastic use waste. The healthcare industry is one area that, for obvious purposes, that there is a lot of single-use plastic, and that's one area that maybe there could be some changing of how things are done to reduce the amount of plastic. There was an interesting study in the UK that looked at the amount of microplastics in the air when surgeries were going on in an operating room versus when no one was in there. And there was a huge difference in the level of microplastics in the air. And I think awareness. My understanding is that in 2040, France that's their target to end the use of single-use plastic. So I think that awareness and having that goal in mind will help all of us move forward. Yeah, and then the one thing I also wanted to mention to tie it back into climate change is after someone uses plastic or drinks that water bottle, and a lot of that gets tossed into the ocean at some point. The plastic in the ocean causes problems with the ocean being able to sequester carbon dioxide, and so that also impacts the climate change and the use of plastic in exacerbating climate change. So I think there's so many interrelationships that we could talk about that are just, first, I think awareness is the first step.
Right. And I hate to use the term ubiquitous, but it's all around us. Talk to us, though, too, Mary, about there's two places that I've discovered over the 4 years of doing this show that none of us don't even dream about in terms of plastic presence and pollution, and that is cosmetics and our chip bags and clothes, I'm told, too.
Yes. So clothes, I'll start with that one. Clothes, when you go shopping, it's always a good idea to be aware of if you're purchasing something synthetic versus something wool or organic wool or cotton. The synthetic materials will shed, and that's producing microplastics into the air, into the environment. And I don't think that's something people are naturally aware of. Another example is if you go to purchase like an area rug, you might notice the ones that are really inexpensive, they tend to be made of plastic, polyester, whereas the more expensive, all 100% wool rugs do not. And so, unfortunately, that kind of points out there are some economic disadvantages kind of built into this problem with the use of plastic because, synthetic clothes, synthetic rugs, synthetic products tend to be cheaper than the all-natural.
So we're saying synthetic products, polyester, and there's some other rayon?
Rayon, yeah.
Anything but cotton and wool. Which is probably a great majority of our clothes.
Right.
And all of those, if it's synthetic, it contains plastic and the full attendant of plastic ills and things of that nature. I hate using the word ubiquitous, but it's all around us. As someone said, we live in a plastic soup.
When you launder your clothes and you have those synthetic products in your washer, that will cause more shedding. And I'm not a laundry expert, but, if you have the luxury of air drying your clothes, that will reduce the amount of particles. But I think the first step is just to realize when you purchase something to look at what it's made of and to be aware of the possibility of shedding.
Indeed. Talk to us a minute about, though, the plastics that are in our cosmetics that we use every day.
So that's another area to be aware. Nina may have more details on this, but it is in cosmetics. It's always a good idea to wash your hands when you handle things like, that could have microplastics on it. But if you're using cosmetics, you're putting them directly on your skin. And so that is obviously an issue. And I think a lot of people don't think about the fact and, may choose to buy a product that they like, whether or not it contains microplastics. And so perhaps that's an area where more clear labeling or education would be helpful.
Indeed. We're going to go to break, but and when we return, we will let these two ladies make us smarter and maybe find out some other ways that this plastic soup is all around us. We'll be right back on the other side with Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Nina Shaw with the EPA. Thank you, ladies. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all H-E-B stores, natural grocers, all central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 40 years, non-mercury with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastic pollution, looking at what's so bad about plastic and why doesn't everyone know about it. And we are back with Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Nina Shaw with the Environmental Protection Agency. And they really are making us smarter. Nina, I want to start with you. Talk to us about how the EPA monitors and assesses the extent and effects of plastic pollution in the environment and on human health. How do y'all do what you do?
Sure. Well, I think this is a great question, but I wouldn't say EPA is the only one participating in this process, because this is a huge, super challenging global issue, right? But we do work internationally, and we cooperate with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, or otherwise known as the OECD. And we participate in their dialogues, and they have been doing a series of studies, one that came out in 2022 called the Global Plastics Outlook. And it looked at global plastics flows around the world and, in particular countries. So we work internationally. We also work domestically with researchers like Mary. And one that we work with a lot is Dr. Jenna Jambak at the University of Georgia, who's looking at plastic flows and waterways. But I would be remiss if I did not point out that our federal colleagues at the Department of Energy, as well as the Department of Commerce, and NIST, the National Institute for Standards of Technology, are doing a lot of work on measurement and really thinking about how do we measure this? What are the standards that we are all going to agree to as we think about these numbers? And then lastly, one of the areas that we're very focused on is working with our states and localities. When the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act was passed many years ago in 1970s, they basically gave most of the responsibility to states and localities to manage products at their end of life and materials at their end of life. So we've just given out grants in the solid waste infrastructure for recycling grants that were funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law, but created or authorized in the Save Our Seas Act in December of 2020. And that money is really crucial. It's the first time we have made national investment in solid waste management policy, basically since the Resource Conservation Recovery Act was passed in 1976. And it's going to allow us to really work on data across the United States and with our states, territories, and the District of Columbia. And that's crucial because you need really solid data that is collected consistently in order to get a sense of what's happening nationally. So we're really excited about the ability to give out that funding, and that is through 2026. But the funds were just given out to states just last year, which is really awesome. We did it by the end of September of 2023. And so we're really looking forward to working with our states and localities on this issue. It's going to change the game for us, I think.
And you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. I realize that probably it needed to perhaps be called by that name for political purposes, but nevertheless, it still takes away, I feel, from the importance of environmental issues, environmental conservation, and attacking those, as well as dealing with climate change, because it doesn't kind of have the name in there, even though a lot of the money and a lot of the funding and the programs do address that. That being said, speaking of that, what is being done there that ordinary people in their everyday lives will see or should benefit from fairly soon?
Fairly soon. This is a great question. So I did mention the bipartisan infrastructure law, also called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That was one piece of legislation from this Congress and the Biden-Harris administration that is basically giving funding to communities, states and communities, to work on this issue. That is where all of this funding is going. And I think that's really important. And when we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a couple different aspects of it. Our Office of Air and Radiation is working on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, CPRG. It is $5 billion that is going to states and localities to work on basically solving the climate crisis. And waste and materials at their end of life, including food waste, for example, are eligible projects. So that's $5 billion that is going to be going to states and communities. We also have the Greenhouse Gas Fund. That is $27 billion that is going to be broken up into a variety of different programs, one called Solar for All, that is going to be going, again, to states and communities to help work on these climate issues. So it is a super exciting and busy time across the federal government, but certainly at the Environmental Protection Agency, to get this historic once-in-a-lifetime funding into the hands of states and communities to solve these problems really in the ways that they think are most important for them. And I think that's the real incredible benefit of both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act.
Mary, though, I want to talk to you, too, if you can talk to us about what are the most innovative and effective solutions that you've seen or perhaps that you've worked on to address plastic pollution at local, national, and global levels.
Yeah, I mean, so I have not personally in our lab worked on, like innovative solutions. I wish I could say we have, but I think that's super important. Globally, I am aware that there was, back in November, a global plastic treaty where they met and they tried to get everyone in agreement. It was United Nations led. But they tried to get everyone on the same page in agreement to reduce their plastic waste. I think there's still efforts to be made in that area. In terms of countries, I mentioned that France has targeted 2040 as a date to end single-use plastic. And I think that, at the local level, there are a lot of organizations, nonprofits, that try to raise awareness and, contribute to the reduction in plastic use.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Nina?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Mary, for raising the International Treaty on Global Plastic, because that's a huge effort and a really important one, right? So Mary was mentioning the third meeting, which just happened in Nairobi in November. The fourth meeting is going to come up this year in April, and the last meeting will come up in November later this year. This is a really important, exciting opportunity, but a super challenging one, right? Because all the parties need to come to agreement, and that's always hard when you're talking about countries from around the world. But one of the things I would say about innovation, and we're working on some reports from the Save Our Seas Act that are getting at this, very topic. But when I think about innovation, sometimes I think, back to our past is also super helpful. So we always talk about reduce, reuse, and recycle. And we focus a lot on the recycle aspect, but really we want to focus on reducing. How do we reduce our usage of single-use plastics in particular? So in my house, sometimes I think about, is there a powdered dishwasher detergent that I could use as opposed to one that is in a plastic bottle? Or even for clothes washing, is there a powder form that doesn't come in a liquid or a plastic bottle? Or reuse. I think reuse is a huge topic. And this is also something that, when I was growing up, Coca-Cola came in a bottle, a glass bottle that was reused many, many times. Dairy, too, used to come in glass bottles from the farm that were also reused many times. And so really we need to rethink those types of topics. And I think Starbucks, within the last couple of weeks, just announced that they were going to allow people to use their cup, their own cup in the drive-through or in their stores when they purchase coffee from them. And so reuse, I think, is going to be something that we start to hear more about as people recognize the opportunity that we have to reuse our cutlery, to reuse our plates and bowls and things like that in cafeterias and other places.
Indeed,
so those
indeed.
are the topics that I think about, yes.
And I think that the consumer goods manufacturers should be a point. They are a very significant point in terms of prevention on the front end. And what in terms of how they package those goods. I want to go back to you briefly, Mary. We only have a couple of minutes. What would you say is the most promising plastics alternative products out there today?
Oh, boy, that's a good one. I am not sure, to be honest with you.
Nina, are you familiar with any innovative plastic alternatives out there today, or even those that are being looked at and talked about?
Sure. I mean, I think, Mary's right. This is a really hard question to answer. And part of it comes from the life cycle impacts of all the different materials. They exist, right? They all have different impacts. And it really is going to depend on what the use is for in order to figure out what the best one is or what the best alternative might be. And that's why I go back to, reducing and reusing, because the best alternative is really not to use it at all, if that's an option. Yeah.
I thank you, ladies, both. But it seems like, too, that one of the things that could make a big impact quickly is to have a very good and effective plastic alternatives. But thank you all so much. We've been today with Mary Johnson with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Nina Shaw with the EPA. And they indeed have made us smarter. So thank you, ladies, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but they all add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you, and join us again next week for more on plastic pollution. And listen to any of our past shows on podcast wherever you get yours. Thank you.